My granddaughter Brittany rolled her eyes and said loud enough for her entire sorority table to hear, "Grandma Rose probably shops at thrift stores because she has to, not because it is trendy." The girls giggled like she would made the joke of the century. I just stood there, holding the hand-knitted baby blanket I would brought for her roommate's new nephew, feeling smaller than I had in decades. Before we dive into the story, I would love to hear your story in the comments below if you have ever felt dismissed by family. And if you are finding this relatable, please give it a like and share with anyone who might need to hear this. Your support means everything. I hadn't planned on stopping by Brittany's college campus that crisp Tuesday afternoon in October. I would been driving back from my quarterly appointment with Dr. Martinez in the city. Nothing serious, just routine blood work and the kind of checkups that become more frequent when you reach 72. The drive home took me right past Brittany's campus, and I remembered she would mention during our last phone call that her roommate Madison had become an aunt. Sweet little thing. Madison was always polite when she answered their dorm room phone and remembered to ask about my garden and my volunteer work at the library. So I would spend the better part of my weekend knitting a soft yellow blanket with tiny ducks around the border. Nothing too elaborate or fancy, just something warm and practical made with love. I would wrap it carefully in tissue paper and placed it in a small gift bag with a handwritten note congratulating Madison's family on their new addition. The bag sat on my passenger seat as I drove through campus, and on impulse, I decided to stop by the student union coffee shop where Brittany often studied between classes. The afternoon crowd was thick, students grabbing coffee between late classes or settling in for evening study sessions. I spotted Brittany immediately, her distinctive red hair catching the autumn light streaming through the tall windows. She would inherited that hair from my side of the family, the same shade that had made me stand out in every childhood photograph and had eventually mellowed into the silver white I wore now. She was sitting at a large round table near the windows with 5 other girls, all of them dressed in that carefully casual way, college women. Perfect. Oversized sweaters and designer jeans that cost more than I used to spend on clothes in a month. Sorority sisters, I assumed. From the way they all wore similar subtle jewelry and had that polished, confident look that comes from belonging to something exclusive. Brittany saw me coming when I was still several feet away, and I watched her expression shift in real time. Not quite annoyance, but certainly not pleasure either. More like the look children get when their parents show up unexpectedly at school. That mixture of surprise and mild embarrassment that says they would rather handle their social world without family interference. "Grandma Rose," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone young people use when they want to acknowledge your presence without necessarily welcoming it. "What are you doing here?" Her friends turned to look at me with the kind of polite interest reserved for interruptions, their conversation clearly paused rather than ended. I could feel their assessment, the way young women size up older ones, trying to place them in whatever social hierarchy makes sense to them. I held up the small gift bag with its cheerful yellow tissue paper peeking out the top. "I made something for Madison's baby nephew. Thought I would drop it off since I was in the neighborhood for my doctor's appointment." One of her friends, a blonde girl with perfectly straightened hair and diamond earrings that caught the light expensively, glanced at the bag and then at me with what I can only describe as polite bewilderment. Like she was trying to figure out exactly why someone my age would be standing in their carefully curated social space. "That is so sweet," the blonde girl said, but her tone had that hollow quality people use when they are being polite without being genuine. "Madison's going to love that." Another girl, this one with dark hair, pulled into an artfully messy bun and wearing the kind of expensive casual clothes that look effortless, but cost a fortune, added, "Homemade stuff is so special. My grandmother used to knit too before her arthritis got too bad." I smiled and nodded, recognizing the conversation for what it was, a polite acknowledgement that would allow them to return to their more interesting discussion as quickly as possible. But then Brittany spoke, and everything changed. "My grandma's really sweet," she said, not to me but to her friends, but she still thinks it is 1985 or something. She probably made that herself because, she shops at thrift stores and thinks homemade stuff is automatically better than what you can buy. The comment hung in the air for a moment, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. The girls exchanged glances, small smiles playing at the corners of their mouths like they were sharing some inside joke. The blonde one, who I later learned was named Kennedy, suppressed what was clearly a smirk. "That is so vintage of her," she said, and the way she said vintages made it clear it wasn't a compliment. But it was what Brittany added next that cut the deepest, delivered with that casual cruelty young people sometimes use when they want to establish their sophistication at someone else's expense. She probably shops at thrift stores because she has to, not because it is trendy. Like, she is always clipping coupons and talking about sales like it is some kind of hobby. Then she laughed, a sound that started in her throat and bubbled up with genuine amusement, as if the idea of her grandmother being financially constrained was somehow inherently funny. Her friends joined in, not loudly, but with the kind of knowing chuckles that said they understood exactly what kind of person I was supposed to be. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, clutching that gift bag and feeling suddenly ancient. Not just old, but irrelevant. Like I was a relic from a time these girls couldn't even imagine. Someone to be tolerated with fond condescension rather than respected as a person with her own dignity and worth. "Well," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, setting the bag gently on their table next to someone's empty coffee cup. "This is for Madison when you see her. Please tell her, I hope her nephew brings the family lots of joy." Brittany barely glanced at the bag, already turning back toward her friends as if our interaction was complete. "Thanks, Grandma. I will make sure she gets it." I nodded and walked away, hearing their conversation resume behind me with renewed energy, probably returning to whatever drama I would interrupted. They didn't call after me to clarify that it was all just a joke. Nobody thanked me for thinking of them, or commented on the obvious care that had gone into the gift. I might as well have been invisible, which, I realized with a sick feeling, was exactly how they saw me. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 25 minutes before I felt steady enough to drive home. The worst part wasn't the humiliation, though that was bad enough. It was the sudden, crystal-clear understanding that this was how my granddaughter really saw me. Not as Rose Castellano, the woman who had survived losing her husband at 55 and built a new life from the pieces, but as some pathetic old lady whose choices were dictated by limitations rather than preferences. In Brittany's eyes, in front of her sophisticated college friends, I was just an embarrassing old woman who couldn't keep up with modern life. Someone whose every choice screamed limitation and whose presence reminded them of a future they would rather not think about. My condominium sat quietly in the afternoon sunlight, a modest but comfortable space I would chosen after selling the family house following my husband Frank's death. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen that got morning light, and a living room where I could watch the seasons change through windows. I would hung with curtains, I would sewn myself. It had felt like home for nearly 20 years, but that afternoon it felt like a hiding place. The irony was almost funny. Brittany's casual assumption about my financial situation was so completely wrong, it bordered on absurd, but the wrongness wasn't the point. The point was that she would felt comfortable making those assumptions publicly, felt safe, mocking me because she assumed I had no power to contradict her narrative. What she didn't know, what none of my family knew, was that I would been making very deliberate choices about how to live and how much to reveal about my resources. After Frank died and I sold our house, I would invested the proceeds carefully with the help of Margaret Williams, a financial advisor who never once treated me like a confused widow who needed someone else to make decisions for her. Margaret had helped me build a portfolio that had grown steadily over the years, while I lived modestly but comfortably. I clipped coupons because I believed in not wasting money on overpriced versions of things I could get for less. I shopped at thrift stores because I enjoyed the treasure hunt and believed good quality items shouldn't be discarded just because they weren't new. I cooked from scratch and grew my own vegetables because I took pleasure in the process and preferred the results. Every choice I made was deliberate, based on values and preferences rather than limitations. But my family had never bothered to ask about the difference. 3 years earlier, When my neighbor Elena Morales had mentioned her dream of starting a catering business, I would offer to help not just with advice, but with startup capital. Elena had incredible talent in the kitchen, the kind of intuitive understanding of flavors and techniques that cannot be taught. But she would been turned down by every bank in town when she applied for a small business loan. No credit history, they told her, as if being a recent immigrant who had worked primarily in cash-paying jobs was some kind of character flaw rather than an economic reality. No collateral, too risky. Elena had come to this country with nothing but determination and an extraordinary gift for cooking, and she deserved better than the narrow vision of what success was supposed to look like. So I would offered her $30,000 to start Taste of Home Catering, with the understanding that we would be genuine partners in the venture. Not charity, not a loan, but a real business relationship based on mutual respect and complementary skills. Elena provided the culinary expertise and cultural knowledge that made our food special. I provided the business acumen, financial management, and strategic planning that turned her talent into a sustainable enterprise. Within 18 months, we were booking events 3 weeks in advance and had developed a reputation for excellence that had clients calling us directly rather than shopping around for competitors. By year 2, we had a waiting list for our most popular services and were considering hiring additional staff to handle demand. My initial investment had tripled in value, but more importantly, Elena and I had built something meaningful together, something that proved older women could create new opportunities rather than just accepting whatever limitations others imposed on them. Elena always introduced me as her business partner, never just her investor or silent backer. When we met with potential clients, she would say, "Rose has an eye for what works. She understands people and what they really want from their special occasions." When suppliers tried to overcharge us or clients attempted to negotiate unreasonable terms, Elena would look to me and say, "What do you think, Rose?" And my opinion mattered. But I would never told Sarah or Brittany about the business, partly because I would learned over the years that my family had very fixed ideas about what kind of person I was supposed to be, and partly because I would grown tired of their assumption that everything I did was somehow quaint rather than competent. After that afternoon at the coffee shop, sitting in my quiet kitchen with that awful feeling still churning in my stomach, I realized I was tired of being underestimated. Not angry in a way that demanded immediate action, but weary of playing a role that diminished who I really was and what I was capable of achieving. I called Elena that evening, after she would finished serving a 50th anniversary party for one of our regular clients. "I want to expand," I told her without preamble. "Something bigger, something visible." Elena was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the exhaustion in her silence. Running a catering business was physically demanding work, even with the part-time help we would hired. "What did you have in mind?" she finally asked. But her tone carried interest along with the fatigue. "A restaurant, a real one. With our name on it, and everything we have learned about what people really want from a dining experience." Elena laughed, but not dismissively. With excitement, with possibility, with the kind of energy that comes from recognizing a dream you didn't know you had been having. "Rose, are you serious? That would require serious money, serious commitment, serious risk. I am serious about all three." We met the next morning at Denny's, the kind of chain restaurant that serves reliable food without pretensions, sitting in a booth by the window where we could talk without being overheard. Elena had been dreaming about a restaurant for months, she admitted, but hadn't wanted to pressure me into something so ambitious and uncertain. She would even scouted a location, she confessed, a charming space downtown that had been home to a failed bistro but had excellent bones and the kind of foot traffic that could support the right concept. "It would cost about $200,000 to do it right," she said carefully, watching my face for any sign that the number shocked or frightened me. "Renovations, equipment, permits, initial inventory, staff training, marketing, and probably 6 months of operating expenses before we would see real profit." I nodded, doing quick calculations in my head. The number was significant but manageable. "I can do that, but I want my name on it too. Not just as an investor, but as a co-owner with real decision-making authority. Elena's eyes lit up with something between relief and excitement. Rose's kitchen. Elena and Rose's, I corrected. You are the chef and the heart of what we do. I am the one who knows how to turn heart into sustainable profit. We shook hands across the table. Two women who had already built something beautiful together and were ready to build something bigger and more ambitious. The handshake felt like signing a contract with the universe, a commitment to proving that age and experience were assets rather than limitations. Over the next several weeks, we threw ourselves into planning with the kind of intensity I hadn't felt since my early days as a young mother learning to manage a household on a tight budget. Elena researched equipment and suppliers, while I studied market trends and developed financial projections. We visited the available space multiple times, measuring and planning and dreaming out loud about what it could become. The location was excellent, right in the heart of downtown with plenty of parking and foot traffic from the courthouse and several office buildings. But it needed work. We hired a contractor recommended by Margaret's husband, a man named Dave, who specialized in restaurant renovations and understood the unique challenges of food service spaces. Dave walked through the building with us on a rainy Thursday morning, pointing out structural issues that needed attention and suggesting modifications that would improve workflow and efficiency. He sketched modifications on graph paper while Elena and I took notes, calculating costs and timelines and trying to balance our vision with practical constraints. The renovation would take 3 months if everything went smoothly. Dave estimated, longer if we encountered unexpected problems with permits or inspections. The good news is the bones are solid, he concluded, rolling up his drawings and tucking them into a worn leather portfolio. With the right touches, this could be really special. Elena and I spent hours choosing paint colors and light fixtures, sampling plates and glassware, designing a logo that reflected both of our backgrounds and personalities. Elena's artistic sensibility guided the visual elements, while my practical experience shaped the operational details. We argued good-naturedly about everything from table placement to menu pricing, but every disagreement led to solutions that were better than either of us would have developed alone. The restaurant opened 4 months later, after renovations that were only slightly behind schedule and marginally over budget. Elena had chosen warm yellows and deep reds for the walls, colors that made the space feel sunny even on cloudy days. Local artists displayed their work on a rotating basis, and Elena's menu showcased both her Mexican heritage and her mastery of American comfort food classics. Opening night was everything we would hoped for and more. The local food blogger, a young woman named Jessica, who took her restaurant reviews very seriously, arrived early and ordered half the menu. She spent the evening taking notes and photographs, occasionally closing her eyes to fully appreciate a particular dish. Elena's mole sauce, a complex blend of chilies and chocolate that took 2 days to prepare properly, drew audible sighs of appreciation from multiple tables. My grandmother's apple pie recipe, which I would finally shared with someone who understood its value, prompted one man to ask if we sold whole pies for special occasions. By the end of our first week, we had a 3-week waiting list for Friday and Saturday evening reservations. By month 3, we were looking at expanding our hours to include Sunday brunch and weekday lunch service. The local newspaper ran a feature story about U.S. titled, "Two Women, One Dream," how friendship built the city's newest culinary gem. The reporter, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who clearly understood the significance of what Elena and I had accomplished, interviewed both of us extensively and seemed particularly impressed by my background in strategic planning and financial management. She described me as the business mastermind behind the operation and noted that my partnership with Elena represented a perfect blend of culinary artistry and entrepreneurial expertise. I framed that article and hung it in my small office at the restaurant, right next to our business license that listed both our names as equal owners. Every morning when I arrived to review the previous day's receipts and plan for the day ahead, I would glance at that article and remember that I was exactly as capable and valuable as I would always known myself to be. But I still didn't tell my family about the restaurant. Partly because I wanted to see how successful we would become before sharing the news, but mostly because I was curious to see how long it would take them to discover what I would been building right under their noses. The answer came 6 weeks after we opened, when my daughter Sarah called me with a note of desperation in her voice that I recognized from her childhood. The tone she used when she would procrastinated on a school project and needed help she was embarrassed to ask for. "Mom, I am in trouble and I need a favor," she said without preamble. Sarah's company was planning a retirement party for one of their long-time employees, and their original caterer had canceled 2 days before the event. 60 people, next Friday evening, and I am supposed to find someone who can handle it on short notice. Sarah continued, her voice tight. "Do you know anyone who does catering? Someone reliable but not too expensive?" I almost laughed at the irony. "What kind of food are you looking for? Something elegant but not too fancy." The honoree loves Mexican food, so maybe something in that direction. "There is this new place downtown everyone's talking about, Elena and Rose's, but I doubt we could afford them on such short notice." Elena and Rose's. Sarah's voice brightened with the desperate hope of someone who has been handed an unexpected lifeline. "Yes, have you heard of them? The reviews are incredible, and everyone says their food is amazing, but they are probably way out of our budget and completely booked." I kept my voice carefully neutral. "Let me make some calls. I might be able to help you out." That Friday evening, I arrived at Sarah's office building wearing my best navy dress and carrying a leather portfolio that contained our catering contracts and service menu. Elena and our catering staff had prepared a feast that showcased everything we did best: chicken mole with handmade tortillas, cilantro lime rice, black bean salad with mango and avocado, and individual tres leches cakes for dessert. The presentation was flawless. Each dish arranged with the kind of attention to detail that separates professional catering from amateur efforts. Sarah was greeting guests near the reception area when I walked in, and I watched her face go through several distinct expressions before settling on confusion that bordered on disbelief. She excused herself from her conversation and approached me with the careful steps of someone who thinks they might be hallucinating. "Mom, what are you doing here? Did someone ask you to deliver something for the caterer?" "In a way," I said, setting down my portfolio and opening it to reveal our business cards, service menu, and the kind of professional documentation that serious catering operations maintain. "I am one of the owners of Elena and Rose's. We are your caterers this evening." The silence that followed felt profound, like those moments in movies when sound drops out completely, and you can almost hear the character's world reorganizing itself around new information. Sarah's coworkers, who had been chatting nearby while sampling Elena's fresh guacamole and homemade tortilla chips, stopped their conversations and turned toward us with obvious interest. Sarah herself just stared at me like I would begun speaking in a foreign language, her mouth slightly open and her eyes wide with the kind of shock that comes from having fundamental assumptions about reality suddenly challenged. "You own a restaurant?" she finally managed to ask. "Elena and I are equal partners. We opened 10 weeks ago." Sarah's colleague Janet, whom I would met at several family gatherings over the years and who had always been polite but distant, stepped forward. "You are Rose from Elena and Rose's." "Oh my God, my husband and I have been trying to get reservations there for our anniversary, but you are booked solid for the next month. Everyone says it is the best new restaurant in the city." Sarah looked between us like she was witnessing something impossible. "Mom, I don't understand. How do you own a restaurant? When did this happen? How is this the first I am hearing about it?" I began setting up the serving area while I answered, arranging warming trays and organizing serving utensils with the kind of practiced efficiency that comes from knowing exactly how to present food in a way that maximizes both visual appeal and practical access. "People are capable of more than their families give them credit for," I said gently, ladling mole sauce into a serving dish and adjusting the placement of tortillas so they would stay warm longer. "I have been in business for years. This is just the newest venture. The party was a tremendous success by any measure." Sarah's coworkers couldn't stop praising the food, with multiple people approaching me to compliment specific dishes and ask for our contact information for their own events. The guest of honor, a sweet woman named Dorothy, who reminded me of myself at her age, made a point of finding me to say that the dinner was the most delicious retirement celebration she could have imagined. The company president, a surprisingly young man who had apparently built the business from nothing over the past 15 years, personally thanked me for saving the day with such incredible service and food quality and asked for our business card so he could recommend us to clients. But Sarah barely spoke to me the entire evening. She moved through the office greeting guests and managing the small details that needed attention. But I caught her watching me work with our staff, observing how they treated me with obvious respect and deference, noticing how clients approached me with questions about future bookings and compliments about the restaurant's reputation. It was like she was seeing a stranger who happened to look like her mother, someone whose competence and professional success challenged everything she thought she knew about my life and capabilities. After the last guest had left and Elena's catering team had finished cleaning up with the kind of thorough efficiency that makes clients want to hire you again, Sarah finally approached me in the quiet office space. "Mom, we need to talk." We sat in her office while the building grew quiet around us. Sarah closed the door and turned to face me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between confusion and hurt and what might have been admiration. "How long have you been hiding this from me?" "I haven't been hiding anything. I have been living my life and building something meaningful with someone who values my experience and judgment. But you always said you were retired. You act like you barely have enough money to get by." I leaned back in her office chair, suddenly feeling the weight of the evening and the complexity of trying to explain a lifetime of choices to someone who would never bother to ask about them before. "I never said I didn't have enough money to get by. You just assumed that because I live modestly." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands while she processed information that clearly contradicted fundamental beliefs about who I was and what my life looked like. "The restaurant must have been expensive to start. How did you afford it? The same way anyone affords to start a business. I saved money, made smart investments, and partnered with someone whose skills complemented mine. But when? How? You raised me alone after Dad died. You worked at the department store and the library. When did you have time to learn about business and accumulate that kind of money?" I smiled, remembering those years differently than she apparently did, seeing them through the lens of someone who had been constantly solving problems and making difficult decisions rather than just enduring hardship. "Sarah, I managed our household budget through some very difficult times after your father died. I negotiated with creditors when money was tight, researched the best deals on everything from groceries to your college tuition, and made every dollar stretch farther than it should have been able to go. That is all business skills. I just applied them differently as you grew up." She shook her head slowly, like someone trying to clear confusion. "I feel like I don't know you at all. You know me exactly as well as you have ever bothered to look." That was perhaps harsher than necessary, but it was true. Sarah had always seen me as her mother first, grandmother second, and never as a complete person with dreams, capabilities, and ambitions that existed independently of my family relationships. "Brittany's going to be shocked when she finds out," Sarah said finally. "Maybe, or maybe she will finally understand that the grandmother she is embarrassed by is actually someone worth knowing and respecting." Sarah looked uncomfortable, shifting in her chair, like someone who would suddenly realize they were sitting on something unpleasant. "What do you mean?" I told her about the incident at the coffee shop. Sarah's face grew progressively more mortified as I spoke, and by the time I finished, she looked like someone who had just realized they would been complicit in something inexcusable. "Oh, Mom, I am so sorry. I had no idea she said that to you. She said it because she believed it, and she believed it because that is how this family has always seen me, as someone who needs help rather than someone who can provide it." We talked for another hour and a half, and by the end, Sarah was crying. Not from sadness, exactly, but from something closer to shame, mixed with a dawning understanding of how thoroughly she would misunderstood someone she would lived with for 18 years and loved for 32. "I want to make this right," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "With Brittany, too. We both need to apologize and figure out how to see you differently. I don't need apologies. I need respect. And respect isn't something you can give someone as a gift after you realize you have been withholding it. It is something you earn through your actions and demonstrate through how you treat people going forward." The next week, Brittany showed up at the restaurant without warning. She stood in the doorway for several minutes, looking around the dining room with obvious amazement, taking in the warm colors and local artwork, the efficiently organized service stations, and the obvious professionalism of our staff. Elena seated her at one of our best tables, a corner spot with excellent natural light and a view of the open kitchen where she could watch our cooks work. Without being asked, Elena brought her our tasting menu, a selection of our most popular dishes arranged beautifully on small plates that showcased both presentation and variety. I watched from across the dining room as Brittany tasted Elena's mole sauce for the first time, saw her eyes widen with surprise and appreciation, noticed how she took her time with each dish rather than rushing through the meal. She was clearly impressed by the quality of the food and the professionalism of the service. But more than that, she seemed to be processing something larger about what this place represented. I waited until she would finished eating before approaching her table. She looked up at me as I approached with an expression I would never seen from her before, something between awe and embarrassment and what might have been genuine respect. "Grandma Rose, I owe you a huge apology." I sat down across from her. "For what specifically? For what I said at the coffee shop, for how I said it, for treating you like you were some stereotype instead of my grandmother who I should have known better, and," she fidgeted with her napkin, clearly struggling with how to articulate something she was still figuring out herself, "and for never asking about your life. For never wondering what you cared about or what you were good at. I just assumed you were, I don't know, retired and bored and waiting for family visits. What do you think now? I think you are incredible. This place is incredible. Everyone here obviously respects you and knows you are in charge. The food is amazing, and Mom told me you manage all the business side of things, which I don't understand how to do at all." I nodded, recognizing the sincerity in her voice even as I waited to see if she would go deeper than surface admiration. "Elena and I make good partners because we each bring different strengths to what we are building together." The blanket I made fun of? Madison's roommate called it the most beautiful baby gift she would ever received. She posted a picture of it on Instagram and got hundreds of comments from people asking where they could buy one like it. That made me smile genuinely for the first time since she would arrived. "Tell her," I said, "congratulations on her nephew, and that I am glad the blanket will keep him warm." Brittany reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box, setting it carefully on the table between us. "I brought you something. It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Inside the box was a silver bracelet with a small charm, shaped like a chef's hat, simple and elegant, and clearly chosen with care, rather than obligation. "I saw it at a little jewelry store near campus and thought of you. Not because you are my grandmother, but because you are a chef and a businesswoman, and someone I want to be like when I grow up." I put on the bracelet and admired how it caught the afternoon light, streaming through the restaurant's windows. "Thank you, Brittany. This is lovely, and I appreciate the thought behind it. Will you teach me sometime about business? I mean, I am majoring in marketing, but I don't really know anything about actually running a company or working with partners or making the kind of decisions you must have to make every day. Of course, you can start by working here this summer if you would like. Elena and I have been talking about expanding our catering services, and we could use someone with your energy and education to help us think through how to market to younger clients." Brittany's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Really? You would hire me? I would train you? Whether you work out well enough to keep employed would be entirely up to your effort and attitude and willingness to learn from people who know more than you do." She laughed, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were talking to each other as equals rather than as grandmother and granddaughter locked in roles that didn't fit either of us anymore. That summer, Brittany worked at the restaurant 3 days a week while taking 2 summer courses to stay on track for graduation. She started in the kitchen, helping Elena with prep work, learning how to dice vegetables efficiently and how to prepare our signature sauces. Then moved to serving tables during our lunch rush, and eventually began helping me with social media marketing and event planning. She was smart, eager to learn, and respectful to every member of our staff, regardless of their position or age. More importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in understanding how Elena and I had built something successful together, asking thoughtful questions about partnership dynamics, financial planning, and customer service philosophy that showed she was thinking strategically about our growth rather than just fulfilling job requirements. I never realized how complicated running a restaurant is. She told me one afternoon as we reviewed inventory reports and planned the following week's specials. I thought you just cooked food and people bought it. Most people think that is why most restaurants fail within the first year. But you and Elena make it look easy. We make it look easy because we work very hard to understand every aspect of the business, from food costs and labor scheduling to customer preferences and seasonal trends. The easy part is what customers see. The hard part is everything that happens behind the scenes to make that experience possible. By the end of the summer, Brittany had become one of our most reliable employees and had helped us successfully launch our expanded catering services, including a social media strategy that attracted younger clients planning weddings and corporate events. The last time I saw those sorority friends from the coffee shop, they were dining at Elena and Rose's for someone's 21st birthday celebration. Brittany was working that evening, serving their table with professional grace and obvious confidence in her ability to represent the restaurant well. When they asked her about working at such a fancy restaurant, she smiled and said, "My grandmother is one of the owners. She is teaching me the business, and I am learning more about entrepreneurship and partnership dynamics than I ever learned in my business classes." I watched from across the dining room as their expressions shifted from surprise to something approaching respect and maybe a touch of envy. The blonde girl, Kennedy, who had smirked at my thrift store comment months earlier, actually said, "That is so cool. Your grandmother must be really successful and smart." "She is," Brittany replied simply. "She is one of the smartest businesswomen I know." The way she said it, with obvious pride, made all the difference in the world. These days, Brittany calls me regularly to discuss business ideas and ask for advice about her classes and internship applications. Sarah stops by the restaurant frequently, sometimes bringing friends who want to experience what she proudly refers to as my mother's place. But the most meaningful change has been internal. I no longer feel the need to prove my worth to anyone or to hide my accomplishments to make others more comfortable with their preconceptions. I speak up in conversations because my perspective has value, and I have stopped apologizing for having opinions or knowledge that others might find surprising from someone my age. The woman who stood in that coffee shop feeling invisible and diminished doesn't exist anymore. Not because I bought a restaurant or proved I had money, but because I stopped accepting other people's narrow definitions of who I was allowed to be. The restaurant continues to thrive. Elena and I are seriously considering franchising opportunities, and we have been approached by a Food Network producer who is interested in featuring our partnership in a documentary about women entrepreneurs over 50. Brittany has accepted a summer internship with a marketing firm that specializes in restaurant brands, and she credits our work together as the foundation for her career interests and her understanding of how successful partnerships function. I credit her growth and changed perspective as proof that respect, once earned and demonstrated, creates space for authentic relationships that benefit everyone involved. The best part of this whole experience hasn't been proving my family wrong about my limitations, but helping them understand that people are always more complex and capable than they appear on the surface. Everyone deserves to be seen fully, respected completely, and valued for who they actually are, rather than who others assume them to be. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had family members underestimate your capabilities or dismiss your worth based on superficial assumptions? I would love to hear your stories about overcoming stereotypes and finding your voice, because sometimes it takes a moment of public embarrassment to remind us that we don't have to accept other people's limitations as our reality. Share your experiences in the comments below. And let's celebrate the power of quiet dignity and persistent determination.